know how much they can do that Oh no, no, you did tell me that because we were looking at how to get a GoPro. Who's Brad?
gun on it. It's got extra armour bolted on the front. Now for the Germans, they in the 1930s, when Hitler comes to power in 1933, he basically rips up the Versailles Peace Treaty. The Germans have already secretly been working with the Soviet Union, the Russians. They've been sending their engineers, they've been sending some vehicles. America by 1939 in its entire history has only made about 380 vehicles. I mean tanks, that is. It's made an awful lot of trucks, vehicles in the way of cars, etc. of course. But what it is doing in the 20s and 30s, American military budgets, people like MacArthur, they hang on to people. They don't spend money on equipment. They just do experimentation. So when war comes, they are ready to then throw money at the problem, and they've got prototype systems such as the suspension, such as using the radial aeroplane engine in the back of this vehicle and that 37mm gun. So they put these together in a hurry. It's the British that first used these tanks later in 1941, and because of their American reliability, the fact they work very well, they're easy to maintain relative to most British tanks at this time. A British soldier calls it a real honey, and that name stuck. We call it officially, Churchill likes the idea, instead of all these abbreviations all the time that we forget which one's which, M3A, whatever it is, Churchill says, give me names. So they call American vehicles after American generals. So this one is after General Stuart, Civil War general, but for the troops, on the whole, if you read a lot of the accounts, honey goes down really well. It's a honey, because they love it. Small turret, you can see, two-man turret. Again, in the front of the vehicle, you've got a driver and co-driver. The big radial engine in the back, that's part of the problem for the Americans. We'll see that with the Sherman. The aircraft industry wants them. They're big, round and tall, so the drive shaft goes right through the middle of the vehicle, quite high. Gearbox and drive is at the front. But at the same time, if you can make that vehicle work, it's great for the British. For a vehicle like this. This one's just been restored, so it's in lovely order, and it's painted as a British chaffee. It's been used at the end of the war, and I've got an account here. Some of you may know there's a book called Troop Leader by Bill Bellamy, and Bellamy was given a chaffee just at the end of the war, and he says of it in his memoir, he said, I was allocated a chaffee tank, Hemlock 3, and that's what's on the side of our restored one here, as my command tank, plus a Humber scout car, Hurstwood. I was of course used to the latter, but the chaffee was new to me, and I became more and more impressed by its speed and manoeuvrability as the days passed. Because again, you've got that very thin 25mm armour, you've got a good gun on it. They put a 75mm gun. It's a gun that was originally developed from one that, of all things, was put on a B-25 Mitchell bomber. It was for ground attack. They develop it further. It's got relatively low pressure. In other words, the rounds don't come out with enormous amount of force behind them. But at 75mm, that still makes a fairly big bang, surrounded by a pot out the end of the barrel with enormous kinetic energy behind it. The pot falls away, and that slug of tungsten flies towards the enemy at supersonic speed and can smash through about a third more armour than what normal armour-piercing rounds can do. So it's a very, very clever way of upping the power of your guns. It was developed at Fort Halstead. Pete Permetto, who was a guy who came over from the Brandt Company, he was actually a Belgian, worked with the French, they'd been developing it. He escapes to Britain in 1940, works with a guy called Coppock. That ammunition that they come up with is a world beater. It really does improve the firepower of these guns. Now the Comet tank is also, for the first time now, just like as in the Cromwell, we've got powerful engines. It ends up with a 17-pounder gun when the first ones are made. They are sent out to Germany. They miss the end of the war by a couple of weeks. Operation Sentry, they're trialled in Germany. Everyone realises we're onto a winner here. It's got a good gun, and that gun can be upgraded. So they start with a 17-pounder, they then put on a 20-pounder gun. And that moves on at the end of the 1950s to a 105mm gun. It's got that Meteor engine in the back. Now the one downside of the Meteor is very thirsty, so the range of the tanks, the Centurion tank when they first go into service, is not that great. They actually build later models with extra tanks on the rear. Now in 1955, the Bundeswehr was reformed, the German army, for the first time. They're first kitted out with American vehicles. We want them, of course, to join NATO, the West Germans. We are worried about the size of the Soviet bloc, the Soviet army. We must get the Germans back in the fight, as it were. So they then start their program for what they're going to call the Standard Panzer. They're originally going to build it with the French. As with so many of these cooperative ventures, they fall out in the end, and the Germans end up with this fellow, the Leopard, what we now know as a Leopard 1. The Germans had forgotten all about, or decided they wanted purposely to go against things like the Tiger, thick, heavy armour. We don't want that. We want mobility instead. So the original Leopard 1s only had protection against about 30mm cannon fire. They put a thumping great big MTU diesel engine in the back, give that vehicle power. T-54s, then they move on to the T-62 and then the T-64. This one coming on now is a T-72 tank. Even though we tend to think of the Soviet era as being very a monolithic society, production, etc., actually tank factories were still rivals. The T-64 tank, built in Kharkov, was being promoted in Moscow. A rival company comes along with what they considered a kind of cheaper version of an earlier tank, a T-62 tank, and they said, basically, the Russian authorities called it would be a mobilization tank. If we go to war, we'll start building it. Very cleverly, though, they managed to get it put into production in 1970, and that leads, basically, it's this tank here, the T-72, 125mm gun, low profile because they've got rid of the loader. It's now an auto loader. You don't need a guy standing up whacking the big rounds in there. A round goes in, followed by a bag charge or a case full of explosives, and that's on a carousel beneath the turret. You can see that the height of this vehicle, it's kept low, it's basically a attack tank. The idea was if the Warsaw Pact countries had attacked NATO, there would be swarms of these tanks in echelon. They are not to be lived on, they are there for the attack. Western NATO countries, we tend to think of our tanks as homes. These ones were going to be used on the day of operation, and there will be so many of them that they'd be following up. Once the first wave has gone through, another wave will take over. So the idea of the T-72, it's that Russian philosophy, keep it simple. It's got a diesel engine in the back, very similar to the one that was in the T-34, rifle gun on the Chieftain. It has got something called a muzzle reference system. Before that gun fires, under the cap at the end of the barrel, it's covered now at the moment by a shroud to stop water going down that barrel, but there's a cap there with a mirror underneath it. Before the gun fires, a light is shone to that mirror, bounce back inside the turret, and there's a system that can work out if the turret, or if the gun rather, has got any bend or any droop in it. Bend because cold wind blowing on the side can chill the metal a fraction of a millimetre. It means that your barrel is slightly bent. If you fire at a target 2.5 kilometres away, you're going to miss. So that is computed out before this tank gun fires. And we're now firing at this generation metal darts, about 13 inches long, made of tungsten or depleted uranium. They go through the air, they've got no explosive on at all. They are there to penetrate enemy armour. Israelis added reactive armour, those blocks of armour to explode when they're hit. Blazer, it was called by the Israelis, and that takes the pressure of an incoming round or a hollow charge round away from the vehicle.
He stands on the wing and turns the stop the engine. Well, it's pretty well the same with the Tiger, it's just a little bit bigger. So what we do is we take a cover off the back of the tank and fit this bracket, which we've already done to save time, and then screw the starting handle into the back of the tank. The starter is a little bit like years ago. You used to have little cars where you could pull them back and then let them go, they go flying across the room. Well, this is the same sort of thing. It uses lots and lots of gears inside the starter to create this this really unstoppable piece of kit. So we've got Gary and Steve, all ready to go. And so it's very, very slow to start with. So they start turning the starter, and it takes a fair bit of muscle. Normally we use people we don't like to do this, but today is different. And we get it up to speed, and when it's ready to go, it'll turn the engine over about 6 revolutions. Is the ignition on? Okay, try that. So we push a little rod into the back, engages the starter, and it starts. That was amazing. So, for instance, if the tank has flat batteries, we can
driving the vehicles who help put them together. They're volunteers. They give their spare time to do this, so do give them a round of applause. They've done very well to keep these all going. Thank you.